Well, good morning, everyone. It is January 27, 2025, and this year has gotten off with quite a bang. We want to talk about shock and awe. Welcome to Rethinking Freedom. This is a movement. This is about really focusing on what is freedom and what does that look like for each of us in our day-to-day lives and the choices that we make. And today we have an amazing guest. All my guests are amazing, but you definitely want to hear what our guest today has to share and think about what choices you would have made under the same circumstances, and that you will make moving forward. So, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. And there are a lot of things going on right now that matter, and there are a lot of people being silenced. Our topic today is silencing Dr. King's legacy. That's a question. Kevin Boyce on free speech, DEI, and the VA controversy. In this thought-provoking episode of Rethinking Freedom, Franklin County Commissioner Kevin L. Boyce discusses his decision to step down as the keynote speaker at the Columbus VA's annual Martin Luther King Jr. luncheon, after being told he could not address diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, for those of you who are not aware of what the VA is, it is the Veterans Administration here in the United States of America, where we are based. Of course, we know that we have viewers who are from all around the globe. We have listeners who listen right here in Central Texas, where I'm based, but who also listen on the app from wherever you are in the world. And of course, this is available on all podcast platforms. Mr. Boyce claims this restriction imposed due to concerns about violating President Donald Trump's executive orders. That's what people are calling him as president. I call him the felon in chief. Was not just an affront to the memory of Dr. King, but a direct suppression of his First Amendment rights to freedom of speech. And as an attorney, and if you live in America, we're always talking about freedom of speech, freedom of speech. Well, who has the right to speak is the question nowadays. We'll explore the constitutional implications of this incident, what it reveals about the ongoing struggles around DEI initiatives. And when we talk about DEI, we're really just talking about leveling the playing field and allowing every human being the right and the opportunity to create a life worth living. That's all we're talking about. We're just talking about opportunity. So when we use these acronyms and things, let's be clear. We're talking about people being able to eat, live, and be in safety, be educated, and die in peace, essentially. We're going to talk about how Dr. King's legacy compels us to speak truth to power, particularly in challenging times, just like he did. Mr. Boyce's steadfast commitment to fostering opportunity and inclusion serves as a rallying call for us all to be champions of our community, to be champions of the values of equity and justice, which are the core tenets of the civil rights movement and the U.S. Constitution, which we know are being torn apart on a daily basis. So let me tell you just a little bit about Mr. Boyce, but of course, as you hear his words, you will get to know him better. Kevin L. Boyce is a Franklin County commissioner who grew up in an extended family of modest means, but one rich with life lessons on hard work and education. Commissioner Boyce would overcome the poverty of his past and earn a master's degree in public administration, serve on Columbus City Council, where he improved city neighborhoods and finances, where he also led a nonprofit dedicated to improving public schools, because most of our children are educated in public schools, regardless of this move to shift taxpayers' dollars to private entities. He was appointed state treasurer of Ohio. He was also promoted as managing director of a New York-based investment banking firm, and he served in the Ohio House of Representatives. And he did all of this before he reached the age of 40. Of course, we are no strangers to this level of excellence, because the man who was being honored at the event that he was invited to speak at, we know was assassinated at just age 39. We can speak about Thomas Sankara. We can speak about Patrice Lumumba. We can speak about Malcolm X. We can speak about Fred Hampton. We can speak about so many of our leaders who have been cut down in their prime. So most of us are about excellence, and Kevin Boyce is definitely in that same lineage, if you will. So first and foremost, welcome to Rethinking Freedom, Kevin Boyce. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for what you're doing. It's so important that the conversation continues every day, every week, at every level. And what you're doing through your podcast is more of a weapon and a resource than you might know. And so thank you for your advocacy and for your leadership. It's good to be here.
Thank you so much for taking time out of what I can only imagine was already a busy schedule, but the last 48 hours, because this happened on Thursday, you guys are watching this on Monday. We're actually recording on a Saturday. I can only imagine what the last few days have been like. So let's start at the very beginning, Commissioner. Can you walk us through what happened leading up to your decision to withdraw from the MLK luncheon?
Okay, so for those who don't know about Franklin County is Ohio's largest county, and where our county seat is in the city of Columbus. City of Columbus is the 14th largest city in the United States of America. Franklin County, the body to which I'm elected at large at, is about a little under 1.4 million residents. So we're talking about a large metropolitan area. My profile as a county commissioner is fairly large, if you will. And so I get a significant amount of requests to speak, to appear at events, to be engaged in different community things. And I have to be very selective on the things that I choose to go to, because there's always a lot of them. So whenever I'm invited for a Martin Luther King Jr. Day legacy celebration, I find those to be a special honor to me, and quite frankly, the highlight of my year usually. And so I'm very selective and picky on those when I choose them. When I say yes, we have done a thorough analysis of why we would do it, where we think we'd have an impact, and then if I can be of a resource to them. So we received a few months back, and that's about the right cadence for engaging our office for speaking engagements. A few months back to come and speak and be their MLK Junior Day speaker. I said yes, and we planned accordingly. So fast forward to the day of the speech. The speech was scheduled for noon in front of the VA audience here in Columbus in Central Ohio. And about 10 o'clock, as I was really preparing to begin to wrap up to leave, because it's probably about maybe a 10 or 15 minute drive from my office, we get a call from the representative of the VA saying, "We're looking forward to seeing you and hearing from you. Everyone's excited. But we also want to let you know that, given the president's executive order regarding DE&I, you will not be allowed to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion." And imagine my shock at being told of first of all, what I can talk about. You asked me to come and participate, and this is a celebration of the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And to me, diversity, equity, inclusion is synonymous with his legacy and his name. And so there is no version of me speaking on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day that doesn't include those references, the value of them, the importance of them, so forth and so on. And so I said, well, if that's what you want to limit my comments to, then I respectfully decline. And I will not be participating, because one, the very first component of me choosing where to speak and what to say is that we have to share the same value set. Let me start there. And if we don't share the same value set, then I politely move on and you can go on your way. It's just that simple to me. Like I said, I get many requests to speak. And so I'm not desperate to stand before people. That being said, they called back, so we said, that'd be that. And I'm moving on. To me, it's a non-negotiable, non-discussion. And they called back and basically said, what's the problem? And I said, there's no problem. We don't share the same values. And I'm disappointed in my VA. My father was a 2-time Vietnam veteran as a Marine. And I've got, a host of family members like we all do that have served this great country and been in our great military. And I said, it's unfortunate. And I'm saddened by your dictation to me about what I can or cannot talk about. So you should find somebody else. It's over. The conversation is over. And then they proceeded to kind of threaten me. Well, we're going to say you just canceled. I said, you can say what you want to say. I'm going to tell the real story, that the reason why I canceled was that you're telling me that I can't mention diversity, equity, inclusion. And by the way, the title of the day, their title of the day was Triumph Through Adversity. And they asked me specifically
the irony,
to tell my story. And then say, well, you can't use these words even in your own story, which again, then you can excuse me from this conversation because we're not talking about the same subject. So that's what happened. And now I understand they're scurrying to kind of cover their tracks, but it is what it is. And you need to own that. And more importantly, we need to have these difficult conversations. We need to confront them, not run away from them when they come. And so to me, this is a great opportunity for us all to be engaged in this conversation in a real way.
I totally agree. So again, we have an audience who might say, we often hear about Martin Luther King. For some people, certainly if you go to the more impoverished parts of most communities, you will see a Martin Luther King Boulevard. That is simply facts. You can see how that area has been starved of resources and so on and so forth. What would you say is the legacy of Dr. King? And why would you think that it's impossible to claim that you're celebrating his legacy while at the same time restricting speech in this way? Not that there should be any reason to restrict that kind of speech. There's some speech that, we know you can't, yell fire in a crowded theater and things of that nature. We learned that in law school. But what is your understanding of Dr. King's legacy, and why, particularly in these political times in the United States of America and increasingly around the world, we must be courageous enough to have these conversations?
Well, I think the legacy starts with you. It starts with me. It starts with people like Barack Obama, Kamala Harris, and so many others. But for his efforts, but for his advocacy and leadership, and quite frankly, his life, we would not be where we are. The challenge and the growth would be even greater for what the needs are. So I think his legacy is more than just a brick in the foundation of fairness, equality, and freedom. I think that it is the foundation, and we're all building on that basic platform. And so to me, there are not many words that can summarize that contribution. But the real legacy to me, the real impact of his legacy is that this work continues, that we continue to fight for the next generation. You and I, we know the limits that we have for our lifetime. We know the incremental growth that we'll make in addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion. But what we're doing is solidifying and strengthening the foundation so that the next generation can build on what we contributed to Dr. King's legacy that allows for growth of this great country. Our founding fathers, while they didn't get every element of building this country right, they fundamentally got some things right. It was our founding fathers who said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that citizens are endowed by their creator with unalienable rights, and among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think Abraham Lincoln added in the Gettysburg Address, and I think it's fundamentally the right. We are a country conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, that's not the case. But it's something
it was aspirational, definitely not the case.
Yeah, but it's something worth fighting for. It's something that we are required to build upon. And to me, that's what the legacy is all about. That to me is what when you ask what is the legacy really about? And those are the things I would have said. Those are the things I would have talked about.
So as you were talking, I should say this. I firmly believe, and I think most people agree with me, that even a broken clock is right twice a day. And so I do not actually give much credit to the so-called founding fathers, because if you were my father, you would acknowledge my humanity, and they did not. So I would just put that out there in that sense. I do not give them that honorific, if you will. But I do absolutely get what you're saying about the aspirational part of the Constitution, and the words that leaders have repeatedly spoken about, America being the home of the brave and the land of the free, and the so on and so forth. And of course, freedom of speech being one of those tenets of this so-called freedom that we have. And so how did you view this restriction on your freedom to speak?
I mean, one, I agree with what you just said, by the way. It's aspirational, but it's important to in the name of democracy. That's what a republic democracy is. It is representative government that comes from the masses. But more importantly, in democracy, the idea is that the masses drive the policy of this country, and it's the idea that was right, that we could evolve and change, that we didn't have a monarchy and a king that would just be driven by the family name you were born in. Yeah, now we know it's not always that practical, or simple. It doesn't quite work like that. We're still unwinding the impacts of the mistakes that our founding fathers made. But nonetheless, it's the proposition that all men are created equal. And that's something we got to fight for. And so I really believe that. I'm sorry, I lost the train of thought on the question. What was the?
You are right on line with it. So what I was saying is, how did you view this affront to your freedom of speech?
I mean, imagine being told that, ask you to come speak, and then you're told, but you can't mention these words. And it is the basis and the foundation for even why you asked me. Okay, so let me ask you this. Did you ask one of my white colleagues to come? Do you generally, for the MLK Junior Day, do you get a white colleague to go? I'm going to venture you don't. And so to me, you come to me for a reason. You come to me for diversity, equity, inclusion. You come to me for the recognition of the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You come to me because you want to hear my story and how it connects to this legacy in this day. And so to be told that, yeah, we want you to come, but here's how we want you to deliver speech, that's absurd. And to me, it's a violation of the First Amendment. It's the very basis of the violation of the First Amendment rights. And I hope somebody from the ACLU is watching this, because I really feel like we should look at that, and we should push the limits of this conversation about freedom of speech, because they have no right. You are a federal agency, and you have no right to tell me what I can talk about. I don't care if I'm standing on your property, standing in your office, or standing on your land. At the end of the day, I can say what I want to say. You don't have to listen. You don't have to change your policy. You don't have to run out and do the things I say, but I can say it how I want to say it. And so to me, there probably is nothing that was more offensive. And as you can see, it gets my blood boiling. I've been in politics for almost 30 years and have never been told you can't.
That's that black don't crack. I hope the rest of you responded the way I did. I knew he was at least close to 40, right? But he just said, I've been in politics for over 30 years. That's crazy.
Keep going. Yeah. I'm in the 50s.
Shout out to your family and your genealogy, and then those genetics. It's working for you.
Thank you so much.
So, there will be some people, I assume, that are going to say, well, maybe because DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, is no longer important. After all, we've had a Black president. We've just had a Black female. Well, some people say Black, some people say Southeast Asian. She's all of those things. But we've just had her run for office, and everything is fine. And so why do we keep bringing these issues up? What would you say to that, particularly in these times, and as we say we are celebrating Dr. King's legacy?
Well, I would say let's peel back the layers and look at the data around diversity, equity, inclusion. is there an economic impact or implication? And I would say, ask the Pew Foundation, who recently released a report that shows the quantitative link to economics around the impact of diversity, equity, inclusion in a granular form of looking at it from business to business and seeing, is there a meaningful and substantial impact for diversity, equity, inclusion? And the answer is yes, but I'll let you do your research yourself. You don't have to take my word for it. So I think, one, being able to identify the correct data and link it to, empirical information. That's the first part. The second part is looking at where diversity, equity, inclusion on a qualitative impact has a meaningful impact. And so, and talk to the agencies. Amazon just released a report about internally how their diversity, equity, inclusion program has impacted their work. Now, they've also denounced their D&I efforts, but when you look at the report that they released, it shows a meaningful and substantial contribution to their bottom line. So when you ask me how this DE&I conversation has a real impact, don't take my word for it. Let's do the research. Let's peel back the layers and look at the real impact of diversity, equity, inclusion. And if it doesn't make its own case, then let's have that conversation. And I didn't even mention the moral component of this. I didn't even go there. So let's set that aside and park that for a second, even though I would be the first to own that side too.
No, I say let's own it all.
Yeah, yes. I'm all about owning that. But for all those folks who want to challenge the need for diversity, equity, inclusion, let's stick to the data and the quantitative side, and let's see if where's the case there. And then let's have this conversation on the more part. The last thing I'll say is, we have to run towards this conversation, not from it. I feel like part of the challenge is that we don't want to have serious conversations about racism in America, about discrimination in America. We don't want to have real conversations about the bottom line of inclusion. What is the GDP of Black America? What is the GDP of diverse America? And let's have a real conversation about those impacts. And then let's see, these companies that want to renounce their DE&I efforts, well, let's see what happens when Black people renounce spending at their stores. Let's see what happens when Black people begin to find their own pathway to accessing the resources they need. And I don't know if this was in my bio, Aya, but I'm also the founder and owner of America's 21st Black-owned bank. That's the reason why I started the bank. That's the reason why I set out those efforts. It's Adelphi Bank.
Please
thank you.
Mention the bank again. So those of you who are looking.
Adelphi Bank in Columbus, Ohio. Please look us up. We became the 21st Black-owned bank, but I was inspired to start Adelphi Bank on the heels of the murder of George Floyd, and the chaos that ensued afterwards. So, it's funny. It's so ironic. The title of the theme of the day at the VA was Triumph Through Adversity. And so I'll use their theme to say that's the reason why I went and started a bank. It was about confronting adversity and saying, okay, well, you have the murder of George Floyd and a lot of chaos and response country. Everybody's launching DE&I programs and all this. But what are you going to do? What are we going to do for ourselves? Are we going to come together and form our own resources so that we can really fight back this conversation with economics, which is what gets everyone's attention? And so to me, I think that's where I'd like to take the conversation. How do we, what is it that we're going to do? How are we going to own this conversation in a way that allows for us to move the needle?
I think that is so powerful what you just said, because the question that I've been getting from a lot of people with the executive orders coming down and so on and so forth is, what are we going to do? I feel helpless. Where do I shop? And that's why that speech would have been so important to have. And you are welcome to share any part of it that you wanted this morning. You talking about it is looking at the challenges that we're facing and saying, okay, how do I, as an individual, and then, bringing other people along, how do I respond to this? And as I'm thinking about the VA, I'm thinking about who does the VA serve and what does that population look like? And how does it work if the Veterans Administration says these words are now taboo? Because if the words are now taboo, then the practice of it, I'm going to assume, is also prohibited. So who is the VA serving, and how do you feel, or based on your experiences, what do you think taking such a stance can have on the very population that they're supposed to be serving?
Sure. I don't have a breakdown on who the VA serves, but I'm going to venture to guess that many of its members are of color. Many of its members are women. And that's enough for the VA over any agency, any other agency, to be 100% dedicated and committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, because the members that it serves are that. And they are a part of the very core of this country in the quote unquote freedom that they represent fighting for us. So to me, I don't know the breakdown of the numbers, but I'm going to venture to guess it's quite meaningful in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion. The other part of this conversation, I think, that I want to have is, it's disappointing that President Trump would issue that executive order on his first day. Now, he wasn't in office 2 days, and that
and on the first day, and on the day that the nation is celebrating Martin Luther King. We'll come to that later.
Yeah,
but please
but think about what that means. The implication of that is his top priority out of all of the things that could be his top priority. That's one of them. And when you look at who voted for him, and when you look at who didn't vote for Kamala Harris, I've got concerns. I've got concerns about the narrative that comes out of politics and what drives and shapes the minds of the voters. And more importantly, one of the things you can say about Donald Trump is, he's doing exactly what he said he was going to do. It's not like he doesn't always say, he's not always, direct about some things he said, but he was very clear about what he had intended to do. And so I'm more disturbed at the voice of the masses. I'm more disturbed at, this support of that ideology. In the Pew report, and I read a few D&I reports last few days, and so I might be mixing these up. I'm gonna just say that now for someone.
Well, everybody can go and do their own research.
You can do your own research
critically for yourself. Yes.
But the point that I read, Aya, was that it said that by the year 2030, non-whites would be the majority of this country. Mm-hmm. And so I really feel like his actions are a response to that element, because all of the other data supports a quantitative and qualitative logic of why we would double down and invest more in diversity, equity, inclusion, especially because by the year 2030, that's going to be the country that we are. And so I find it ironic. Yeah, that 2025, I've got mine in a binder just like that. When I read through my binder.
For anyone who is still confused about what's going on, here's the crazy thing. They put it in writing for us. You are exactly right. That is the fear that is fueling this. Roland Martin also wrote a book called White Fear. That is the fear that is fueling a lot of these things. Kick as many of them as we can out, imprison as many more as we can, kill off, immunity for police officers who do whatever, and starve the communities, because that is what we're seeing now in terms of the restrictions on who you can contract with and whether they're DEI contracts and so on and so forth. It's really back to, for those of you paying attention, go back and look at 1865 to 1877, the Reconstruction period, and then look to see what happened right after that with Jim Crow and all the laws. Again, people feel like laws come down from God. No, human beings that we elect are making these laws and then imposing them on us. But you are precisely right in terms of the response from the masses. And I'm looking at not just who voted for Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris and all the other people down ballot. I'm also looking at the millions of registered or eligible voters who never even bothered to cast a vote.
Yeah.
And who thought that somehow that was a protest vote, but not really understanding the basics of civics. And here in my community, we're going to be starting a whole civics a series of civic sessions to bring our community together. Let's get back to the basics, because when you choose not to use the power that you have to elect people who will make decisions and policies and laws that benefit all of us, you are choosing to abdicate that power. It's not a protest vote to say, and then it's no flex to say I didn't vote because I didn't think either party cares, because elections have consequences, and we're seeing that right now.
Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I that's what I wrote on my little note here. Elections have rewards and they have consequences, and you choose which one you want. And you know, I can deal with an election that I vote for and it doesn't come my way. I can, you know, and that's this current election. You know, at the end of the day, you know, I voted, I participated in this election, didn't go the way I voted at any level, quite frankly. But now that means I've got more work to do. That means, what am I going to do to step up and take on the cause? And again, as we're talking about and celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy, I feel compelled even more to double down in this space. I was telling somebody the other day, you know, I love the challenge of what are you going to do? Because, you know, even starting a Black-owned bank, that's one component to try to take on this broader issue. You know, you do that because less than majority banks make less than 1% of their mortgage loans to Black families. Black banks make over 70% of their loans to Black families. The number one wealth builder is home ownership. And so we've got to begin to think about our own contribution to this broader conversation. And it starts with elections, and elections have consequences. By the way, I also add that, you know, when our founding fathers were creating this country, they analyzed various forms of government, and they looked at monarchy and kings, and they really settled on a republic democracy because it was all about, to them, you know, at the time in 1776, they were breaking away from the tyranny and rule of Great Britain and King George III. Yes. And so they were in a process where they were saying, okay, how do we want to govern, and how do we want generations behind us to govern? And again, we know they didn't get it all right, but there were some pieces that they had the right intention, which was the republic democracy, that the people would choose our leaders, and that would drive our public policy. That would drive our change. And to be frank, that's how we got to where we are today in terms of slavery ending, and, you know, so because that was the will of the masses at the time, you know. And so, and there are various reasons to why, but nonetheless, that's how change happens. And so, you know, I can live with the outcome of the election. What I can't live with is when folks choose not to participate and then complain about the results of public policy that affect them. That's the part that we've got to get better at.
And understanding that every privilege, that particularly those of us who've been historically disadvantaged. So when that Constitution was written and they were talking about all men, they were really talking about men, white men with property. And then everybody else was like, nope, we are going to enter this conversation. We are part of the people. So when we talk about we the people, it should not just be white nationalists, which seems to be where this current, I wouldn't even call them the Republican Party, the MAGA party is trying to forcefully move the entire nation to. So there was a statement put out by the VA, and they said that they are emphasizing that their goal is to recommit. They said we are recommitting to our core mission, rather than focusing on DEI. So I went to pull up, well, what is the mission for the VA? And it says, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs oversees VA in its mission to provide health, education, disability, funerary, and financial benefits earned by veterans of the United States Armed Forces. And the question is, how do you do any of that? How do you provide health if you don't take into consideration that human beings are different and have different health needs? How do you not look at the diversity within the group that you're serving? How do you provide education without paying attention to those components as well? Even on the very basic level of we have different learning styles. And certainly we can talk about the history of discrimination within the VA when we look at VA loans, when we look at educational loans, which for a long time, Black and brown veterans were denied. We can talk about Harriet Tubman and how she served and was denied benefits. How do you talk about addressing disability? Disability is right in the, as we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. How do we include people if we're not going to take notice of their disabilities? And so talking about, sometimes we use words, and I'm challenging my audience as we rethink freedom, not just to take in words, but to think about what those words mean. So how do you recommit to your core mission, which is health, education, disability, funerary, and financial benefits, and disregard key aspects of who those people are? So the health needs of someone who is biologically male are different from the health needs of someone who is biologically female. So how do you say we are focusing or recommitting to our core mission rather than focusing on DEI, as though the two are diametrically opposed? That is quite frankly a little insane to me, but I guess it sounds good.
Yeah, I'm not even sure I can add to that. I mean, you just said that perfectly. Well, I agree with you 1000%. And remember, even embedded in, so first of all, we are a nation of immigrants. Let's start there.
Some of us came willingly, and some of us were drug here.
That's right. That's right. But at the end of the day, that's what we are.
Yes. The only natives are the indigenous people who have been erased for the most part. Yeah, but please carry on.
But embedded in that idea is cultural competency. Is really ensuring that we understand every element of culture for different people, different walks of life, so that we can give them the best chance for success in this country, which means everyone benefits. Yes. If my neighbor is successful, there's an element of that directly affects me, and so I think just a cultural competency is being underlooked in that part of the conversation, because in the VA to say, well, by the way, I haven't seen their statement they put out. I do know that they're scurrying, and I stand firm, 10 toes firm on my position with them that it is clear to me that we don't share the same values, and I hope that Congress, I hope that the president, I hope that those who make those decisions will reconsider this DE&I conversation. His executive order was a direct order to the federal agencies, but I really hope, as you just laid out so perfectly, I really hope that there is an opportunity to take a look in the mirror and look at who are we really talking about. And what can we do to ensure that we're doing everything we can? I mean, these folks have served our country. These have protected us. These people have
sacrificed their lives,
maybe have lifelong injuries and things that have changed their life. And what are we doing to ensure that when you do that, when you serve our country, you will be treated with dignity, fairness, and resource. And you will especially not be discriminated against in this environment. And I just think it's an insult to those who have served to not recognize their value in a cultural competency kind of platform and way.
And I'm hoping that as people listen to this, that there are more people who are finding, as Dr. King would say, the courage of their convictions. And that realize that, yes, it's all well and good to speak up when there are no challenges, but that it is really during these times that we have to make sure that our voices are not silenced. Last night, the new Secretary of Defense was
confirmed,
confirmed by the Senate. And when I watched the proceedings of that Senate confirmation hearing, and just the things that came out, of course, I knew this before the hearing, but the things that came out about his character, even the values that he has embraced, even talking about women in combat and what roles women can have in the armed forces. I hope that this is a wake-up call for all freedom-loving people to say, where will I stand in this moment? Will I cower in fear, or will I have the courage of my convictions? And clearly you are a man who has the courage of your convictions. And we thank you for truly living out the legacy of Dr. King in your decision, because you could have allowed yourself to be silenced, which, by the way, is what they attempted to do with Dr. King, and which is why he was assassinated. And when Dr. King transitioned, when he was killed, there was a poll that came out where it was like less than 25. He had less than a 30% approval rating in the United States of America. And it really took Coretta Scott King and some other people really bringing to the forefront the sacrifices of this man, what he believed. I was just rereading a copy of his book, which I may not put my hands on right now. Oh, here it is. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? And I would say if Dr. King was here right now, this would, I think, have been his 96th birthday, that he would probably say we are in a very chaotic state at this point. So I do have a question for you. Given the divisive nature of DEI, which is insane to me, because each human being is diverse in and of themselves, right? But given the divisive nature right now about this conversation about DEI, and how politically charged this conversation is, even as we see so many people dealing with issues that stem from the continued discrimination in our nation, how can organizations, how can well-meaning individuals, how can public officials like you balance the importance of equity with fears of controversy or federal repercussions? Because that's another real part of this. I mean, people can look at Dr. King and say, yeah, I admire him, but I want to stick around and raise my children. I don't want to die. And there's some real threats right now against people who are speaking up courageously. So how do you think people and organizations at this point, because these conversations are happening everywhere. Just yesterday, targets that had been championing DEI. You know what? Let me just say this before I let you answer this question. It is not surprising, but it's very disappointing that 4 years ago, in the wake of the murder, the brutal, barbaric murder of George Floyd, with someone who calls himself a human being putting his knee on the neck of another human being for such an extended period of time, hearing that person cry out and ignoring those cries, and other people in the vicinity ignoring those cries out of fear, out of duty, out of whatever, until that man lost his life out there on that tarmac, right? That 4 years after all of these companies, quote unquote, we're for humanity, we're for diversity, equity, inclusion, we're going to throw money at this. Target has the Juneteenth celebration, come and buy your cups and plates with Black, faces on it. And we are creating a whole section with beauty supplies from Black entrepreneurs. That just like that, someone comes into power, and that's what we're talking about is power here. And all of a sudden, all of those commitments that you made to quote unquote diversity, equity, and inclusion just go away with the wind. I mean, were you ever really committed, or are these games that we're playing? So back to my original question. How should organizations, how should individuals, how should public officials balance the importance of equity and speaking up about it? Because truly, all of us die or live together with the fear, the very real fear out there of the cost of speaking up for social justice, the cost for speaking up, the cost of speaking up for humanity. How do they balance it?
Well, first, I think it's an important question. And the first thing I would say to my colleagues in elected office at the local level everywhere is to double down on where you stand and hold pat to the idea that you control the value set of your entity, whether it's the city, the county, whatever. That's what representative democracy is. And so me as the county commissioner, it's my job to carry the value set of the community, of what I think that is. In Franklin County, we are going to double down on our diversity, equity, inclusion efforts. We're going to ensure that women-owned companies have a chance to do business at Franklin County. We're going to ensure that, and I'm picking some out, but they're all going. We're going to focus on ensuring that anyone can compete in Franklin County for and that contract. That's what diversity, equity, inclusion is. It's not about a woman or black or gay or whatever. It's really about that everyone has a chance to compete. Everyone has a chance that if we are going for a certain job and I present my credentials versus person X, I just want the equal review of my. I don't want you read through my resume. I don't want someone else who has far lesser just because of the color of their skin. They have the advantage. They're seen and looked at as a better choice, and so D&I is all about leveling the playing field, not a real advantage. And we have to do some work to ensure that the playing field is level. And so I would say the first thing is to my colleagues in local elected offices is double down. What's your value set? Ask yourself, what is this county? What is my city's value set? And I believe that corporations are next. You have to ask yourself as a company, what's my value? What's my value set? And I believe corporations are very much like people. Corporations have personality, they have values, they have resources. I mean, all of those things that we judge people by, corporations have, as well. And so,
the Supreme Court said corporations are people. So
yeah, absolutely. So that's right. So I would say double down. The second is to not be afraid of the conversation. Run toward it, not away from it. The more we have the real conversation, the hard conversation about race in America, about discrimination in America, about inclusion in America, exclusion in America, the more we have these conversations, the more that we're going to grow as a country. And we have to deal with it. And we may not make the ground that we want to make in that very conversation or even at this time. But it's important that we're having the conversation so that we can continue to make ground at some point. And then the final thing that I would say we have to do is put your money where your mouth is. I mean, at the end of the day, that's where it all counts, and track it. We have an Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion for Franklin County. And there, we years ago, after affirmative action was wiped out, for long we fought to try to have goals, and then finally said, okay, you can have goals. You can have goals and so we have these goals, and now they're coming after the goals. So even if you just say, I got a goal to be inclusive, now they're coming after that. Like, come on, how, but I say, until the law is changed, let's focus on doing the real work so that the case makes the case itself. So the data makes the case itself. And data is always something that you got to be able to turn to really make the case, because it's not enough that there's the underlying moral element of this. We know that's not enough for everyone. So let's focus on data on top of those things. I'm not overlooking the moral part. I'm all for that. But let's focus on data and presenting it in a way, in Franklin County, I have no expectations for us to do otherwise. I mean, I was the first Black commissioner in the history of Franklin County 8 years ago. There in Ohio, every county has 3 county commissioners. And so I'm one of the 3. We're all elected at large. I was the first Black person. Today, the majority of Franklin County Board is Black. We have a Black female and one Commissioner Erica Crawley and myself, Commissioner Boyce, and then we have a white commissioner by the name of John O'Grady. The beauty about Commissioner O'Grady is he understands the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're in a position that this is Franklin County's value set. And we're going to double down on this. And so whether the VA or the federal government, what they're doing is not relevant to what our value set is. And I call on every local government office to take a stand and put your money where your mouth is. Double down on the work and lead by example.
Thank you for laying that out so clearly. And even as you described, at least at this time, the racial composition of the commissioners, you can see where that fear is coming from. Because for anyone who is entitled and used to owning everything, any form of equality feels like oppression to them. You know, and so, oh my God, 5% of the student body is now Hispanic or Black. Well, that must mean that they're displacing the white students who should have made up 100% of the student body. You know, sometimes when people say, well, why do you guys have HBCUs? For those of you who don't know what that is, historically Black colleges and universities. Well, that was a response to the fact that we were closed out of the institutions, even though our taxpayers' money were going into it. And so trying to level the playing field is not about oppressing anybody. It's actually giving everybody an equal shot. I'm really glad that you raised that. And as you speak to the things that people and corporations and elected officials can do, I would really want to talk to my fellow citizens who are not elected officials. First of all, many of you are in jobs where you do have an opportunity to speak up about things. Speak up. Speak up, because your silence is not going to guarantee your living. In fact, again, there is nothing that we have women, our right to vote, Black people, our right to vote. The fact that we don't have Japanese internment camps anymore, even though now this administration is building camps to setting up tents where they want to just go in and find people and put them in there. I mean, we need to know that, as Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. And we need to figure out as individuals what our demand would look like. For me, the closest grocery store to me is a neighborhood Walmart. And since Walmart decided that they are not interested in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, I have cut down my expense, what I spend there, by about 90%, and I am moving towards 100%. I would drive further to go and get what I need, because if you're saying you don't value me, then you don't value, I'm not going to let you have my hard-earned dollars either. And so each of us needs to decide what role we're going to play in speaking up, in being courageous, in saying this is not as it should be. And if we're really going to honor the legacy of Dr. King, have the courage of our convictions. So as we wrap up our time together, first of all, let me just ask this. Is there anything else that you would want the people to know before I ask my next question?
The only thing I would maybe add is that, you know, we're on the front end of this conversation. I mean, this man ain't been in office a week. And I want everyone to really think deeply about a very serious conversation and approach this 4 years. And it's subjective about how you think a president is doing or how you think a Congress is doing. All of that's, just depends on a lot of things. But I think this is going to be a different experience. And I think the impact we will have to deal with for decades to come. And the question becomes, is what you said, Aya, what are you going to do as an individual? And so I challenge the public to really think about being more engaged in this conversation. You talked about driving a little further to get the resources you need. I'm all about that. Me too. I'm watching these companies. and I can get everything I need somewhere else. And, and I'm not going to patronize companies that want to see my personal demise. The second thing I want to point out is what you said. You said any form of equality feels like oppression to these folks, and I want people to really zero in on that, because think about that. No one wants to fight. Who wants to embrace, I'm at the top one day and I want to be, down. The sort of natural logic of that is I'm going to fight to stay at the top of the food chain. And so in order for us to level that playing field, it's going to require us to do this in droves. And when I think of, I know we got some other things to cover here, but when I think of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I think about reading about the day he was shot, in his face, in his head. And I think about him lying there, looking in the eyes of his fellow advocates as his time on this earth unwound. And they all said he knew he was going to die. He knew it was coming. And I want you to think about that. As you go about your daily life.
He said, I see the mountaintop, but I may not get there with you. Yeah. He had a premonition. Yeah.
Oh, he knew. But I want us to think about that for our daily lives. We may not be entrenched in it like he was and under the threat like he was, but in so many ways we are, and I think when we embrace that, we'll begin to be motivated and understand, drive a little further to get the goods you need, cut companies off that you may like or be used to, and to do the things that can have a meaningful impact. But it only works if we organize it and do it together.
Kind of like the Montgomery bus boycott, right? And people walked miles. And people, came together and supported one another in the way that they could. I think as we wrap up our time, I just want to reiterate for our audience what you just said, which is that this is just the beginning. If you did not, before the election, take the time to read Project 2025, if you did not listen to any of the people who were breaking it down when Donald Trump was saying, I've never read it, I don't know what that is, I have nothing to do with it, understand that there was a similar project, Mandate for Leadership project, that was created right before Ronald Reagan became president. And according to them, not me, their facts that they put in the Project 2025, they said they were able to implement 60% of those policies, and that they understand the importance of the first 100 days. And these guys were very methodical, and women, and some of whom look like us as well, in what they've put together. And you can see that they had everything ready to go from day one, because it has been rapid fire from the second he said, so help me God.
And can I just add, can I add one thought here too? And when you look at the crafters of it, these are all legitimate, credible thinkers. These are not.
Well, I don't know how credible they are, but yes.
I mean, credible to the people that make those decisions.
Yes.
And so I mean, these are folks who are ranking members of the military. They are professors, college professors. They are doctors. They are lawyers. These are people who in the broader scheme of the people will listen to and follow.
And yet that does not excuse them from the evil that they are trying to put on everybody. And the question is, again, what are we going to do differently? How do we protect our rights to free speech? How do we stand up in this atmosphere of this torrent of really abusive edicts that are coming down, so to speak? How do we fight back, as opposed to just wringing our hands in despair, which I would say our ancestors did not do. They stood up and they fought with far fewer resources than we have now. But there was a sense of self, a sense of unity. And so people, we need to know our history. We need to read. We need to understand what is coming down the pipeline in terms of Project 2025. And we need to understand that if we don't resist, this is going to reverberate for centuries. So when we go back to the Reconstruction period, 12 years that we had, we started to elect people who looked like us, African Americans, and so on and so forth. And then the Jim Crow laws came in. And from 1877, We're going all the way back to 1954 before we have the Brown v. Board of Education ruling. And so if we don't make a change now, we might be in trouble later. I'm not sure that the majority of people in the United States of America understand how quickly this so-called democracy is being dismantled. I think that because so many people are not reading, because so many people are getting their information from maybe one news media or from social media, that this alternative facts that was introduced during his first administration, this fake media and fake information, all of these buzzwords that they've put out there, the disinformation, I call them lies. Forget disinformation and misinformation, the lies that are being put out there, the propaganda that's putting out there. I think it has lulled people to sleep. When you look at Project 2025, over and over and over again, they talked about wokeness and their attack against wokeness. Commissioner, how do we wake people up to the real dangers of the times that we're living in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we've got to do more to try to wake people up, then we're in deep trouble. To me, the circumstances, if these circumstances haven't woke you up by now, I'm not sure what will. That being said, I think our job, Aya, is to continue this advocacy and the conversation. Your podcast, your show is such an important component, an ingredient to that progress. If we're not having the tough conversation, if we're not, my grandmother used to say, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then damn it, it ain't a frog. If we're not calling it out for what it is, then we are taking a step back and we are allowing the system to overcome our progress. And you said something that really jumped out to me about the dismantling of our democracy in just a short amount of time and what the next 4 years could be like. Well, I'd argue that did we ever truly have a democracy if it's so easily dismantled? And I think that's the real underlying question that should motivate people. It should motivate us all. And I maybe challenge them to think about future generations. When I think about my time on this earth, I'm more zeroed in today on how my children will live when they're my age. What my grandchildren will be like. I don't have any, but when I do, what my grandchildren, what this world will be like for them. And so if you're not motivated for how it affects you now, just take a second to think about the future generations, your children, your grandchildren. And so, I would end this with just call on everyone to do something, be a part of a new civil rights movement. And you talked about the Reconstruction era. I could go on and on about the things that happened and stories that happened, that what seemed like progress then was actually a setback for our future. And that's what I see now. And so let's be focused on the things that really have a substantive meaning. And to me, the biggest part of it is not running away from the conversation, but running toward it.
Yes. And as you were talking about running towards the conversation, I was thinking about, like, in marriages, we always say, the big thing is communication. Are you communicating? So if we're going to be in this country, if we're even going to be citizens of the world, and we cut off communication, we start silencing people like they attempted to silence you, then the communication falls apart. And that's where a whole lot of, slew of issues arise. Again, as you were talking, something that just hit me again, you were saying you're motivated by what lives your children and your grandchildren, when you have them, could possibly live, and that being a motivating factor for your choices today. I want all of us to understand that is motivating some other people in the opposite direction. So you need to be really clear. When I was a much younger human being, and someone would bring a fight, right? You got to size up the person, and you're like, okay, what are my chances, and how do I improve my chances, if you will, especially if you're not the aggressor in this, but this person is intent on causing you harm. Cowering will not prevent that person from causing you harm. The idea that you're going to appeal to their better person, their sense of humanity, which seems to be what I'm hearing a lot of, well, bipartisanship, and let's just try and reach across the aisle. No, people have told you exactly who they are. Maya Angelou said, when people tell you who they are or show you who they are, believe them the first time. And so the question for us right now is, how much dignity do you have in yourself? Are you going to stand up, understand what this battle is, and actually fight? So like with the Civil War, there were people who were intent on keeping our ancestors enslaved. We could not sit it out. We could not hope that they eventually come to their senses and understand we're all humans, because it had already been 200 and some years where they had refused to come to their senses. Even though they knew you were human, because they would still rape you, they would still have you breastfeed their children. So they knew you were human. And so for those of us who are like, nah, I'm just going to mind my business, I'm not getting into this, all of that, for those who chose not to vote, we can't sit this one out. There are people who are fighting for a particular world, and that is a world where, like you said, they are at the top of the food chain and everybody else is starving. And then there are those of us who are saying there is enough for everybody to eat and everybody to live. And that's the world we want to create. But one or the other is going to win. And it depends on who shows up and who has the courage to follow through. And I hope that those of us who are fighting for our common humanity will be the ones who win out. So I always ask this question, Commissioner Boyce, of all of our guests. How would you define freedom? We here at the Rethinking Freedom, how would you define freedom?
Oh, that is a big question. When I think about how I define freedom is it perhaps starts with financial freedom. Mm-hmm. And embedded in financial freedom is the idea that you can compete, that you can get a job, you can compete for a contract, or you can get a job that fits your qualifications, experiences, and characteristics. It is the idea that you can build a life for your family where you live, work, and play in an environment that you seek and that you choose, any place that you choose, that I'm not limited based on any of those factors. And so, and I would say that we've got a ways to go. My bank, I was saying earlier, which is a Delphi bank. Delphi is Greek for brothers, so think brothers, the Brothers Bank. But we started off with the name 1865 Bank. And the reason why I named it 1865 Bank originally was because that marked in history, it symbolically marked in history a time when slaves were freed after those last slaves were realized that they were free in Texas, and it started a path toward freedom. But here was the thing. We tested the name 1865 Bank in focus groups, and nobody knew what 1865 was relevant for. We would say in the focus group, and it was, a very diverse group of focus groups. When you say 1865, what does that mean? And people would say, I don't know. Is that an address? Is that a number? The zip code? Well, and we found that a very low percentage of people, it triggered freedom. It triggered a year that freedom was supposed to be. An idea then was, okay, it was signifying a year of freedom.
And sir, that shows the effectiveness of our education system, that we have erased people, we have erased history, we have rewritten a whole other narrative, because 1865 should be as relevant as 1776, if not more so.
Absolutely. I mean, I thought that's why I named my bank that, and so we ended up changing the name because, there was just different issues in my board, my bank board, that, we went to that direction. The point I'm making is that when I think of freedom, I think that it is first that we all have to embrace that as a very serious measure of quality of life for us. And to me, it's embedded in financial freedom. It starts with financial freedom. In America, everything is capital. Everything is measured by finances. And so when you have your own financial freedom, you truly have freedom. And so to me, it starts with, the level, the playing field being leveled, and financial freedom. And boy, do we have a long way to go.
A very long way to go. Well, again, Commissioner Boyce, I'm so grateful that you came to share this story with us and your courage. Thank you for standing up in the midst of this adversity. We will definitely be praying for you over these next few weeks and years, because when we stand up, yes, sometimes there's that pushback. We want to thank everyone who has been supporting you. And for those of you who didn't know about what was going on, listen, when you have warriors at the front line, they need to hear that encouragement.
Absolutely.
So Franklin County is the county in which I was born. I was born in Columbus, Ohio. So all my Columbus peeps, my Ohio peeps, and anybody elsewhere, you can find him online. We'll also have information about where you can reach him in the description on our YouTube channel. And go and open an account with Adelphi. I mean, please.
Ask for me. You can ask for me and I'll get you squared away.
There you go. So I'm going to be calling my son who lives there and saying, hey, brother, let's go open an account. But we want to thank all of our audience, and please like, subscribe, share. We share a lot of disinformation. We need to share the truth as well. We need to build ourselves up. And we thank you so much for your support. And sir, you are welcome back at any time. We will be following this story. And again, thank you for your courage.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Aya. My pleasure.